The Galactic Coalition fleet stretched across the void like a metallic leviathan, its dozens of ships bristling with weapons that could vaporize planets. Commanders from 5 alien races, each more arrogant than the last, gathered on the flagship Briaton Apex to witness what they assumed would be a spectacle of dominance. The room buzzed with chatter, the alien commanders reveling in their assured victory before the battle even began. On the massive holomap of the system, a single dot blinked into existence. It was tiny, almost insignificant. There it is, sneered Commander Krelv, a towering insectoid of the Vorten Imperium. His mandibles clacked with amusement. The humans sent a single pilot. Have they finally given up trying to fight? Admiral Helion, leader of the Coalition fleet, fixed her luminous, predatory eyes on the display. Her voice, sharp as a blade, cut through the laughter. A pathetic showing. I almost feel insulted they wasted our time. A new wave of laughter erupted. The Coalition was facing the last-ditch resistance of a species barely clinging to its place among the stars. Earth had already lost colony after colony, and now this alone human pilot flying a vessel that barely registered as a threat. Unseen by the Coalition, Captain Jonas Calder shifted in the cockpit of his battered fighter, the Resolute. A crackling alert flashed on his console, warning him of fuel levels so low that they could generously be described as optimistic. Jonas wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead and grinned. "You've got to love when they underestimate you, don't you?" he muttered to no one in particular. He was alone out here, of course, but alone was where Jonas thrived. The Resolute wasn't much to look at. It was a single-seat fighter patched together from scavenged parts, its hull a patchwork of mismatched panels and jury-rigged systems. To the Coalition, it was little more than space junk. To Jonas, it was home and, more importantly, his weapon. Earth's military high command had sent him on a suicide mission to stall the Coalition's fleet while evacuation ships escaped the outer colonies. But Jonas didn't see it that way. Where others saw impossible odds, Jonas saw an opportunity. He adjusted his helmet, stared out at the vast Coalition armada, and smirked. "All right, time to make them regret inviting me to the party." Back aboard the Briaton Apex, Admiral Helion's claws clacked on the console as she issued orders. "Dispatch a frigate to deal with the nuisance. One is more than enough for this farce." Commander Krelv grinned, his mandibles quivering with glee. "This will be over before our second meal cycle." As the Vorten frigate detached from the fleet and moved to intercept the Resolute, the bridge crew laughed again. The humans' desperation was comical to them, an absurd end to an otherwise tedious campaign. But Jonas wasn't laughing. He was too busy working. As the frigate closed in, he throttled up, sending the Resolute rocketing toward the enemy ship. On his sensors, he watched the frigate power up its plasma turrets. The odds of survival were astronomically low, but Jonas had always been a fan of the long shot. The Vorten captain transmitted a message, his sneering insectoid visage appearing on Jonas's cracked display screen. "Terran pilots, surrender now and you may be spared as a curiosity for the Imperium's archives." Jonas tilted his head as if considering the offer. Then he leaned forward, switching off the transmission mid-sentence. "Sorry, didn't catch that. Too busy winning." As the frigate fired its first salvo, Jonas yanked the control stick hard to the right. The Resolute spun into a wild corkscrew, narrowly avoiding the plasma blasts. Jonas whooped as adrenaline surged through his veins. Close, but no cigar. The frigate pursued him doggedly, its larger size making it a lumbering predator compared to Jonas's nimble craft. Jonas dove into an asteroid field, weaving between massive rocks as the frigate struggled to keep up. On board the Briaton Apex, the Coalition commanders watched in confusion as their frigate failed to land a single hit. "Why is it taking so long to destroy one tiny ship?" Admiral Helion demanded, her voice ice-cold. Krelv bristled, his pride wounded. "The pilot is surprisingly evasive, Admiral. But it's only a matter of time." Jonas, meanwhile, was grinning like a madman. "Surprisingly evasive. I like that. Maybe I'll put it on my gravestone." His fingers danced over the controls as he activated a field of sensor decoys. Dozens of false targets lit up on the frigate's sensors, causing its targeting systems to glitch. Jonas swung his ship into a wide arc, looping behind the frigate. "All right, let's see how you like this." With a flick of a switch, he launched a single torpedo. The weapon streaked toward the frigate, slipping through its faltering defenses and striking its engine core. The explosion was spectacular, a burst of fire and debris that lit up the asteroid field. On the Briaton Apex, the laughter died abruptly. The red marker representing the frigate disappeared from the holomap. Admiral Helian's eyes narrowed. What just happened? Krelv stammered, his mandibles twitching. The human destroyed the frigate. Helian's fury was palpable. She turned to her crew, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Send 3 more ships, and make sure this pest is eliminated." The other commanders exchanged uneasy glances. One, a gelatinous creature named Gorvath, spoke up hesitantly. "Admiral, perhaps we should reconsider our approach. This pilot seems unorthodox." Helian's claws raked across the console, leaving deep gouges. "Enough. He is a mere human. I will not allow our forces to be humiliated by such a lowly species. Send the ships." Jonas watched as 3 more vessels broke away from the fleet, their engines flaring as they moved to intercept him. He reached into a compartment and pulled out an old cassette tape, slotting it into the ancient player mounted on his dashboard. A rock anthem blared through the cockpit. "All right, round 2. Let's see if you've learned anything." As the enemy ships closed in, Jonas pushed the Resolute into full throttle, his grin widening. The real fight was just beginning. Jonas Calder had no illusions about what he was up against. 3 coalition warships, sleek, deadly, and brimming with advanced weaponry, were bearing down on him with a single-minded intent to turn his little Resolute into space dust. But Jonas had survived countless unwinnable scenarios before, and if there was one thing he knew, it was this: chaos was the great equalizer. Inside his cramped cockpit, Jonas flipped a few switches, bringing his ship's overclock systems to life. The Resolute hummed with barely contained energy, and his sensors lit up with the signatures of the incoming ships. 3 against 1. Jonas muttered, rolling his neck to loosen the tension. "Hope you guys brought your A game." The coalition ships split into a triangular formation, each maintaining precise distance and speed as they approached. Jonas knew what they were doing, boxing him in, leaving no room to escape. It was a textbook maneuver. Jonas hated textbooks. With a sharp pull on the control stick, he sent the Resolute hurtling toward the lead ship, zigzagging unpredictably to throw off its targeting systems. Bright bolts of plasma erupted around him, but Jonas kept his cool, threading the needle through the incoming fire. The lead ship, a luminal destroyer called Zephyr's Claw, opened a channel to him. Its captain, a glowing figure of liquid light named Vasari, appeared on Jonas's cracked display. Terran pilot Vasari intoned, his voice a deep, resonant hum, "Your resistance is illogical. Surrender and you may still survive to see the ruins of your world." Jonas responded by spinning his fighter into a corkscrew maneuver that took him directly under the destroyer's belly. He flipped a toggle, ejecting a trail of sensor scramblers. The Zephyr's Claw's targeting systems went haywire, locking onto phantom signals. "Sorry, did you say something?" Jonas quipped. "Bad reception out here." As the destroyer struggled to recalibrate, the second coalition ship, a Vorton assault frigate, swooped in from the side, its guns blazing. Jonas gritted his teeth and pushed his fighter to its limits, dodging plasma bursts by fractions of a second. His movements were erratic, seemingly reckless, but every turn and roll was calculated chaos. "Too slow," Jonas muttered, spinning his ship to face the frigate. He lined up his shot and fired a pair of missiles. The first missile struck a shield generator, creating a momentary gap. The second missile punched through, detonating inside the frigate's hull. The explosion was so intense it momentarily lit up Jonas's cockpit. When he emerged from the debris field, the frigate was nothing but twisted metal. Inside the Briaton Apex, Admiral Helion slammed her clawed hand on the console, her fury boiling over. "How is he doing this?" she snarled. "He's exploiting the gaps in our formations," Gorvath observed nervously. "His movements are erratic but effective." "Erratic is not a strategy," Helion snapped. "It's luck, and his luck will run out." As if to prove her wrong, Jonas was already outmaneuvering the third ship, a sleek luminal interceptor. This one was faster, matching the Resolute's agility with frightening precision. The two ships danced through the stars in a deadly chase, neither able to land a decisive hit. "All right, buddy," Jonas said under his breath. "Let's see how you like a taste of home-cooked ingenuity." He accelerated toward a nearby debris field, a floating graveyard of ancient ships from some forgotten war. The interceptor followed, its captain confident that Jonas had trapped himself. But Jonas knew the field like the back of his hand. Weaving through the maze of shattered hulls and drifting wreckage, Jonas led the interceptor deeper and deeper into the field. The Coalition ship's weapons carved through the debris, but its pilot struggled to keep up with Jonas's erratic path. At the last second, Jonas dove into a narrow tunnel formed by two massive hull fragments. The interceptor tried to follow, but its sleek design couldn't fit. It slammed into the wreckage, erupting into a brilliant fireball. Jonas whooped, punching the air. And that's 3 for 3. On the Briaton Apex, the mood was grim. The commanders stared at the holomap, where 3 more red markers had vanished. This isn't possible," Krelv stammered. "One human can't tient." "Enough," Helion roared, her mandibles flaring wide. "If you want something done right, you do it yourself. Ready, my flagship." A murmur rippled through the command deck. The Briaton Apex was the largest and most advanced vessel in the fleet, a fortress of steel and firepower. The idea that its admiral would personally lead the charge against a single human pilot was unthinkable. But Helion's pride had been wounded, and she would not tolerate further humiliation. Jonas, meanwhile, was catching his breath. His ship's systems were barely holding together, and warning lights flashed ominously on his console. "All right, Resolute," he said, patting the dashboard. "We're not done yet. Just one more big dance." As the Briaton Apex moved into position, its sheer size dwarfed everything else in the sector. Jonas couldn't help but let out a low whistle. "Well, aren't you a big fella?" The flagship's weapons came to life, and Jonas felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't just a fight, it was a statement. The Coalition wanted to crush him in the most spectacular way possible. "All right, Admiral Big and Shiny," Jonas muttered, gripping the controls. "Let's see what you've got." The final battle was about to begin. The Briaton Apex was less a ship and more a mobile fortress. Its black, jagged hull shimmered with energy fields, and its weapons array boasted enough firepower to obliterate an entire planet. The flagship's engines roared, propelling it forward like an unstoppable predator stalking its prey. From his cockpit, Jonas Calder stared at the massive vessel, his grin replaced by a look of grim determination. The Resolute was holding together with duct tape and luck, and now it was facing the most powerful ship in the Galactic Coalition. "All right," Jonas muttered under his breath, "let's see how much trouble one human can cause." Inside the Briaton Apex, Admiral Helion stood tall at the center of the command deck, her chitin-covered frame illuminated by the glowing tactical displays. Her voice was cold and commanding as she issued her orders. "Target the Terran ship with our primary battery," she snapped. "I want this over quickly." The ship's gunnery crews complied, their hands or equivalents gliding over holographic controls. The Briaton Apex's plasma cannons powered up, their barrels glowing with a menacing blue light. "Fire," Helion commanded. The void lit up as an enormous volley of plasma bolts streaked toward the Resolute. Jonas pushed his fighter to the limit, rolling and diving to avoid the incoming fire. The blasts exploded around him, each near miss shaking his cockpit violently. "Is that all you've got?" Jonas shouted, his voice drowned out by the sound of alarms. Helian's mandibles twitched in annoyance as she watched the human's craft dart and weave through the barrage. Impossible. No pilot is that fast. Admiral, his maneuvers are too unpredictable, a luminal officer warned. Our targeting algorithms cannot compensate. Helian's luminous eyes burned with anger. Then compensate manually. I will not let a primitive ape make a mockery of us. Back in the cockpit of the Resolute, Jonas knew he couldn't keep dodging forever. The Briaton Apex was too large and too well shielded to take down with a single torpedo, and its gunners were starting to adapt to his patterns. Time to even the odds, Jonas muttered. He adjusted his trajectory, heading straight for the flagship's flank. The move seemed suicidal. Plasma bolts streaked past him, some close enough to singe the Resolute's battered hull. But Jonas had a plan. As he approached the Briaton Apex, Jonas launched a cluster of decoy drones. The tiny devices emitted false signatures, creating a swarm of fake targets around the flagship. The Coalition's targeting systems faltered, overwhelmed by the sudden influx of data. What is he doing? Helian demanded, her claws digging into the console. Jonas didn't answer. He was too busy executing the next phase of his plan. Using the confusion caused by the decoys, he dove toward the flagship's underbelly, where its heat vents and auxiliary systems were exposed. And this might sting a little, Jonas said, firing a precision burst from his ship's laser cannon. The blast struck a cluster of heat exhaust vents, causing a chain reaction that sent flames rippling across the Briaton Apex's surface. Inside the flagship, alarms blared. Damage to auxiliary systems, a technician reported. Reroute power and focus fire on that pilot, Helian bellowed. The Briaton Apex unleashed another devastating volley, but Jonas was already gone, darting away from the ship's underside like a wasp escaping a swat. That's right, Jonas said with a smirk. Try to hit me. I dare you. Helian's fury boiled over. He's toying with us. Focus all remaining weaponry on his craft. As the flagship concentrated its firepower on the Resolute, Jonas lured it toward the edge of the debris field. He moved erratically, skimming dangerously close to shattered hulls and drifting wreckage. The Briaton Apex followed, its gunners firing relentlessly. Admiral, this is highly irregular, Gorvath protested. We are moving into unstable territory. I don't care, Helian snapped. Destroy him. Jonas's heart pounded as he executed the final stage of his plan. He flew deeper into the debris field, dodging wreckage and laser fire with hair-raising precision. The Briaton Apex lumbered after him, its massive bulk smashing through smaller debris. At the center of the field, Jonas found what he was looking for: the remains of an old fusion reactor from a derelict ship. Its core was still intact, emitting faint but unstable energy readings. Bingo, Jonas said. He angled the Resolute toward the reactor and fired a single torpedo. The weapon struck the core, and for a moment nothing happened. Then, a blinding explosion erupted, sending a shockwave rippling through the debris field. The Briaton Apex was caught in the blast, its shields absorbing the brunt of the explosion but faltering under the strain. The flagship shuddered violently, fires breaking out along its hull. Inside the command deck, Helian was thrown off her feet as consoles sparked and systems failed. What just happened? She demanded. The reactor exploded, a technician shouted. Shields are down to 20%. Jonas looped around to survey the damage. The Briaton Apex was still operational, but it was battered and vulnerable. Looks like you're not so invincible after all, Jonas said, lining up his final attack. He launched his remaining torpedoes, targeting the exposed sections of the flagship's hull. The weapon struck true, detonating with precision that only a veteran pilot like Jonas could achieve. The Briaton Apex reeled from the impact, its systems failing one by one. Finally, its engines sputtered and died, leaving the once mighty flagship adrift in the void. On board, Admiral Helian stared at the flickering tactical displays in disbelief. This cannot be. Jonas's voice crackled through the comms. "Hey, Admiral, you still think humans are primitive, or do you want to call it a day before I finish the job?" Helion clenched her claws, her pride in tatters. The Terran pilot had not only survived but humiliated her fleet. Reluctantly, she gave the order to retreat. "Pull back the fleet," she said, her voice bitter. "We have underestimated this species." Jonas watched as the coalition ships began to withdraw, their once imposing formation now a battered, disorganized mess. He leaned back in his seat, letting out a long sigh of relief. "Not bad for a guy with duct tape holding his ship together," he said, a weary grin spreading across his face. Earth was safe. For now. As the coalition fleet limped away, Jonas Calder allowed himself a moment to breathe. The stars, once a chaotic blur of plasma fire and explosions, now stretched endlessly before him, calm and infinite. His cockpit lights still flickered from the strain of the battle, and his hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline ebbed away. "Well," Jonas said to the empty cockpit, his voice tinged with exhaustion, "I'd say that's one for the books." The Resolute systems whined in protest as he adjusted the controls, the poor fighter barely holding together. The hull was scorched, the engine was running on fumes, and most of his weapons were spent. But the ship was still flying, and for Jonas that was all that mattered. A signal crackled through his comms, interrupting his moment of quiet. It was a transmission from Earth's military high command. "Captain Calder, this is Commander Valen. We're receiving your signal. Are you still alive out there?" Jonas laughed, the sound dry and hoarse. "Alive and kicking, Commander. The Coalition's pulling back. The evac ship should have a clear path now." There was a stunned silence on the other end before Valen replied, his voice filled with disbelief. "You mean to tell me you held off the entire fleet? Alone?" "Well," Jonas said, leaning back in his seat, "I had some help from an exploding reactor. But yeah, pretty much." Another voice joined the transmission, Admiral Harkov, Earth's highest-ranking military officer. "Captain Calder, you've just pulled off what every tactician on Earth thought was impossible. You've given us time. The evacuations are proceeding and the Coalition fleet is retreating from the sector." Jonas could hear the awe in the Admiral's voice, but he couldn't resist deflecting it with humor. "No need to thank me, Admiral. Just doing my part to make the galaxy a more confusing place." "Consider yourself a hero," Captain Harkov said. "You've bought us more than just time. You've shown the Coalition that humanity isn't going down without a fight." Jonas shook his head, his smile fading. "Don't go handing out medals yet, Admiral. They'll be back, and next time they won't underestimate us." "Let's make sure they regret it when they do," Harkov replied. "For now, return to the nearest base for repairs. You've earned a rest." Jonas hesitated. The Resolute systems were screaming for attention, and his fuel reserves were dangerously low, but as he stared at the distant stars, his instincts told him to stay vigilant. "Not yet," Jonas said. "I'll hang back and make sure they don't change their minds. Besides, someone's got to keep an eye on them." Admiral Harkov started to argue, but Jonas cut the comms. His gaze turned toward the Coalition fleet, now little more than a scattering of dim lights in the distance. Aboard the crippled Briaton Apex, Admiral Helion paced the ruined command deck. Sparks rained from damaged consoles, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt circuitry. Her officers avoided her gaze, their shame palpable. How Helion growled, her voice low and venomous. Did one human pilot manage to outmaneuver and humiliate the finest fleet in the galaxy? None of her subordinates dared to answer. Gorvath, the gelatinous officer who had warned against underestimating the human, finally spoke up. "Admiral, perhaps we must reevaluate our strategy against this species. They possess a resourcefulness that defies logic." Helion's claws flexed, her fury barely contained. "Resourcefulness is a poor substitute for power. The human won today because of our errors. That will not happen again." Still, Gorvath added cautiously, "Their pilot demonstrated an understanding of tactics that warrants closer study. It would be unwise to dismiss them entirely. Helion turned sharply, her luminous eyes narrowing. Do not mistake an aberration for a pattern, Gorvath. The coalition will regroup, and when we return, we will extinguish their defiance permanently. Despite her words, a seed of doubt had taken root in Helion's mind. The Terran pilot had done more than defeat her fleet, he had challenged her perception of humanity. Jonas hovered near the edge of the debris field, keeping a cautious distance from the retreating fleet. His fighter's sensors were barely functional, but he watched the coalition ships with a sharp, calculating gaze. Looks like they're really leaving, he muttered, his voice heavy with relief. But even as the tension eased, a nagging thought lingered in the back of his mind. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. Jonas keyed in a command, setting a course for the nearest outpost where the evacuees were gathering. His ship groaned in protest as it accelerated, but Jonas patted the dashboard affectionately. Hang in there, resolute. We've got one last job to do. As he flew through the remnants of the battlefield, the stars seemed brighter, their light cutting through the darkness. For the first time in weeks, Jonas felt a flicker of hope. Humanity might be outgunned and outnumbered, but they weren't out of the fight. They never would be. Far away, in a quiet corner of the galaxy, whispers of the battle were already spreading. The Coalition's finest fleet had been humbled by a single human pilot, and the tale was beginning to ripple through the ranks of both allies and enemies. Some laughed at the absurdity. Others marveled at the audacity, and a few began to wonder if humanity might be more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Jonas Calder didn't care about any of that. All he cared about was that, for one day, he'd shown the galaxy what humans were capable of. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.